The alley smelled of damp concrete and rust, a faint trace of garbage lingering in the shadows. Felicia stumbled over broken glass, her fractured arm sending jolts of agony up her side. Her mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. An ambush, a misstep, someone had betrayed her. Each echoing footstep of her pursuers drove her panic higher. She could hear them shouting, taunting, but she couldn't respond, couldn't even scream. The city felt alive with menace tonight, every shadow a threat, every corner a potential trap. Her phone vibrated violently. She dropped it in shock, then scrambled to pick it up. "He broke my arm." She typed without thinking, her fingers trembling. She hit send. Immediately, a reply lit up the screen. "Don't move." Felicia froze. The words were short, precise, almost violent in their simplicity. A presence she couldn't see, yet seemed to fill the alley. It was a command, but it felt protective, too. A shadow detached from the darkness. In a blink, a figure had covered the distance that should have taken minutes. He moved like a predator, but there was a strange precision, a restraint. Felicia tried to scramble backward, but her arm screamed in protest. She collapsed into his arms, helpless. The men who had been chasing her were already on the ground, unconscious or worse. He didn't speak, but his eyes, cold, calculating, impossibly alert, told her everything. Felicia realized she was no longer running. She was caught in something far larger than herself. He carried her effortlessly, each step deliberate. Felicia's heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the strange intensity of his presence. She wanted to ask questions, but the words wouldn't form. Finally, he spoke, low and commanding. "I told you, don't move." It wasn't a warning. It was ownership. Her pulse spiked. She had never met anyone like him. He was danger personified, yet somehow, he was her shield. He didn't release her until they reached a sleek black car parked in the shadows, hidden from view. The ride was silent except for the faint hum of the engine. Felicia tried to piece together where they were going. Every turn of the car, every shadow they passed, made her realize how fragile her safety had been and how absolute his control was. The car stopped outside a building that could only be described as a fortress. Cameras, security guards, and subtle defenses that Felicia barely noticed hinted at a man who controlled more than just the streets. Inside, the cold antiseptic air hit her first, then the bandages. Her arm was treated swiftly, efficiently, with a sharp warning to anyone who even glanced at her wrong. The man watched silently as she regained composure, his presence both terrifying and protective. Every glance she gave him was met with scrutiny, but not cruelty. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered. He leaned closer, his gaze unwavering. "Because I decided you're mine." The words made her shiver. There was no negotiation, no room for argument. This wasn't just protection, it was possession. Later, Felicia sat alone in the sparsely decorated room, her thoughts spinning. The world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. She thought of the men who had attacked her, of her life before tonight, and realized it was gone. The man who had saved her, claimed her, wasn't going anywhere. She felt fear, yes, but also a strange, dangerous curiosity. She didn't understand the rules of this new world, but she knew one thing. She was inside it now, whether she wanted to be or not. Felicia woke to silence. The soft hum of the city outside the reinforced windows was a distant threat. Her arm ached less now, though every movement reminded her of the violence she'd narrowly escaped. The apartment was spare, almost clinical, but impeccably secure. Cameras, locks, and strategically placed furniture suggested someone who expected trouble at any moment. Felicia's mind raced, trying to piece together her new reality. He appeared in the doorway without sound. His presence filled the room like smoke. Felicia's pulse jumped, not from fear this time, but from the strange intensity of his gaze. "You move too quickly," he said, voice low and measured, "and you'll regret it." Felicia swallowed. His words weren't just a warning. They were an unmistakable statement of control. He spread a map across the table, its surface littered with marks, codes, and photographs. Felicia could barely comprehend what she was seeing. This was no ordinary criminal organization. He controlled networks, resources, and men with precision and an almost obsessive attention to detail. "We extract them tonight," he said. His eyes, cold and unwavering, met hers. You'll stay close. Follow my instructions exactly. Felicia nodded, swallowing her fear. She didn't yet trust him, not entirely, but survival demanded obedience. The hours that followed were a blend of meticulous preparation and tense anticipation. Weapons were checked, routes memorized, signals agreed upon. Felicia felt like a puppet, yet strangely aware of the safety his command provided. Night draped the city like a shroud. They moved silently, slipping through alleys, side streets, and shadows. Every sound, the distant siren, the clatter of a loose metal grate, made Felicia's heart jump. He stayed close, a constant presence. When a stray cat darted across their path, he barely glanced at it. But Felicia felt the power in his control. There was a rhythm to his movements, a precision that was frightening and mesmerizing at once. The target building appeared suddenly, a fortress in its own right. Guards, cameras, and electronic locks made it seem impenetrable. Felicia's stomach knotted, but he simply observed, calm, calculating. The operation began with a precision that left Felicia breathless. He moved like a shadow, neutralizing threats before they could react. Felicia followed, adrenaline replacing fear. Each step, each command, made her aware of her own vulnerability and the impossibility of escaping his influence. They reached the target, men who had been watching, waiting for their moment of chaos. In seconds, the confrontation was over. Felicia could barely register the violence, the efficiency, the sheer dominance of the man she had barely known hours ago. "You need to understand," he said after, voice low and urgent. "You're not just surviving tonight. You're under my protection now. And my protection comes at a price." Felicia nodded, unsure what to say. She understood perfectly. The night had changed everything. Back in the apartment, Felicia's body trembled. The adrenaline faded, leaving raw nerves and aching muscles. He watched her, silent, unyielding. She wanted to ask questions, demand explanations, but fear, respect, maybe even awe, kept her silent. "You're not safe outside," he said finally, almost as a statement of fact. "You're safer with me. But understand this, safety is a chain, and chains aren't broken easily." Felicia felt a strange mixture of dread and relief. She was caught, trapped in a dangerous world she barely understood. Yet in his presence, there was undeniable clarity, a sense that for all the chaos, she had a tether, a man who would control the storm around her, whether she wanted it or not. The night stretched long, filled with tension, exhaustion, and a quiet intimacy that wasn't comforting. It was necessary. Felicia realized that survival was no longer her goal. Understanding him, navigating him, and surviving him would define every choice she made. The city lights reflected off the rain-slicked streets like shards of broken glass. Felicia's stomach twisted as their car turned down an unfamiliar avenue. The building ahead was a high-rise of steel and mirrored windows, imposing, unyielding, untouchable. He didn't speak as they entered. Felicia followed silently, aware of the hum of power in every polished surface. This was his domain, and the way he moved through it, a predator among lesser creatures, made her realize the depth of the world she'd stumbled into. The elevator ride was quiet, save for the soft click of the doors. Felicia's eyes traced the patterns of light on the walls, catching glimpses of her reflection fragmented across the steel panels. Her reflection didn't look whole, not like her own, anyway. She felt fractured, exposed, yet drawn into the inevitability of him. The doors opened to a penthouse that seemed carved from the night itself. Shadows clung to the corners, light spilling in only where he allowed. Expensive, cold, imposing. Yet every element screamed meticulous taste. Felicia realized she was no longer a visitor. She was an intruder in his kingdom, yet simultaneously the centerpiece of a design she barely understood. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Every glance, every slight tilt of his head communicated command, ownership, expectation. "Do you understand why you're here?" he asked, voice smooth, measured, dangerous. Felicia swallowed. I think so." "You will," he said, and there was no room for argument. He laid out the boundaries, the rules, and the consequences with an almost surgical precision. Felicia listened, trying to anchor herself in his words. But each rule was another thread binding her closer, and each consequence hinted at the violence he was willing to unleash on anyone who disobeyed. "You're safe," he said, "but only because I allow it. Step out of line, and safety becomes a memory." Felicia's mind raced. She was a woman accustomed to control. Yet here, control had a new shape. He dictated movement, space, speech, even thought. And the terrifying part? She didn't resist. She couldn't. The invitation came as a whisper, a night of glimmering masks, whispers of power, and the scent of danger. Felicia followed him through a world of aristocracy and criminal might, where alliances were forged and destroyed in the flicker of an eye. He held her close, yet distant. The crowd saw a pair, but they didn't understand the tension, the electric undercurrent of possession and threat that hung between them. A rival caught his gaze. Felicia's hand trembled in his grip as he approached, calm, calculated. In seconds, the threat dissolved, not through negotiation, but through the sheer weight of his presence. Felicia felt the impossible clarity of his protection and simultaneously the impossibility of escape. The private suite overlooking the city, Felicia finally dared to speak. Why me?" she asked, voice small, almost swallowed by the darkness. He didn't answer immediately. He circled her, eyes sharp, calculating. "Because you ran," he said finally, "and because running made you mine. Fear, defiance, it's intoxicating and dangerous, but I protect what is mine." Felicia shivered, caught between relief and terror. She understood now. This wasn't love, not as she knew it. It was obsession, dominance, control. And yet, she felt an undeniable pull toward it. Days blurred into nights. Felicia moved through the penthouse, the city, and his world like a ghost in someone else's kingdom. Every instruction was precise. Every glance, every gesture reminded her that she was under his scrutiny. He tested her boundaries, pushed her limits, and observed with unrelenting intensity. Felicia realized that every movement, every word, every small act of defiance was cataloged, assessed, and claimed. She was both prisoner and participant, terrified and alive. One night, she found herself in the mirrored hallways of the penthouse, reflections multiplying endlessly. Each shard of glass seemed to echo her own vulnerability and her inescapable tie to him. He appeared behind her without sound, a shadow merging with shadows. "You see yourself," he murmured, "but do you see me?" Felicia's breath caught. She didn't, and somehow she knew she never would. The kingdom had its threats. Rivals, informants, and ambitious underlings all tested his power. Felicia witnessed his ruthlessness firsthand. A meeting turned violent. Words escalated to knives, then guns, then blood. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. The scene held her in a mixture of horror and fascination. He controlled the chaos, directing it like a conductor with an orchestra of violence. And all the while, he remained tethered to her, not protectively, not gently, but as a man who claimed ownership in ways words could never explain. When the room fell silent and the last threat was neutralized, he turned to her. Felicia saw it in his eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that she had witnessed the depth of his world, and there was no undoing it. Alone in the penthouse, Felicia traced the scratches of glass along the balcony railing. The city sprawled below, shining, dangerous, indifferent. She felt the weight of everything she had witnessed, survived, and been forced to accept. The glass kingdom wasn't just his domain. It was a reflection of him, unyielding and fractured, beautiful and deadly. Felicia realized that her life was no longer her own. She had entered a world of power, obsession, and control that she could neither escape nor fully understand. And perhaps she thought that was the point. The city skyline was a jagged line of fire and steel as night fell. Felicia stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes tracing every movement below. For the first time, she understood the full weight of his empire. Each street, each building, each whisper of shadow was his domain. He entered silently, closing the space between them with a predator's grace. "You're thinking too much," he said, voice low, dangerous, carrying authority that made her heart race and chest tighten. "I'm trying to understand," she said, though she knew understanding was impossible. He smirked, stepping closer. Understanding isn't survival. Obedience is. Her stomach twisted at the truth, but she felt the undeniable pull of it. Survival, she realized, meant surrendering to him entirely, even if surrender was terrifying. A rival family had made a move. Felicia watched as his men, shadows themselves, intercepted messages, tracked movements, eliminated spies. The city hummed with tension, and the penthouse became a nerve center of silent command. He briefed her in the war room. Maps spread like veins across the table. "Every action has a reaction," he said, voice crisp, commanding. "You will see it before it happens. Anticipate it, learn it, and never, ever forget your place." Felicia nodded, swallowing hard. The power imbalance, always present, felt sharper now. She was more than an observer. She was witness, participant, pawn. Yet she felt strangely alive in her fear. The attack came swiftly. A convoy ambushed at a secluded intersection. The sound of engines, screams, and metal against metal tore through the night. Felicia, in the car beside him, gripped the edge of the seat. Her body shook, heart racing. He remained calm, eyes scanning, hands steady, issuing orders that cut through the chaos like knives. By the time the smoke cleared, enemies lay incapacitated or fleeing. The ruthless efficiency of his response left Felicia awestruck and terrified. She realized that safety was not promised. It was enforced violently without mercy. Later, in the sanctuary of the penthouse, he approached her quietly. No words, just proximity. The smell of him, the heat of his presence, sent shivers down her spine. "You saw," he said softly. "You know what happens when rules are broken. And you stayed." Felicia swallowed. I stayed because..." He cut her off with a look, sharp, commanding. "Because you belong here in my world. Not fully, not freely. But you stay, because it's safer with me. And because you can't leave." She felt the truth of it in her bones. Every heartbeat, every breath tethered her closer to him, closer to danger, closer to inevitability. Even in his meticulously controlled kingdom, betrayal lurked. One of his trusted men, someone Felicia had met, someone she'd come to think untouchable, slipped. A message, a glance, a half-truth that carried the weight of deceit. He confronted the traitor in the private suite. Felicia watched from the shadows, unable to look away. The conversation was calm at first, then escalating. Threats sharpened into promises, promises into consequences. In minutes, it was over. The man lay beaten, broken, and aware that his position was lost forever. Felicia realized the depth of his obsession with control. Every thread of loyalty, every potential fracture, was observed, tested, destroyed if needed. Alone again, Felicia wandered the mirrored hallways, the city sprawling beneath her like a living organism. She traced her fingers along the glass, seeing herself multiplied in reflections. She thought about her past, the choices that had led her here, and the fragile illusion of freedom she'd clung to. And she realized that freedom, in his world, was a luxury she could not afford. Yet, there was fascination, undeniable magnetism. She was drawn to his darkness, his ruthlessness, his possession of her in ways both terrifying and intoxicating. The rival family struck again, this time targeting one of his key operations. Explosions shattered the quiet night. Fire illuminated the streets in crimson, and Felicia's pulse quickened with adrenaline and fear. He led the response like a conductor of chaos, moving with lethal precision, dispatching threats with hands, weapons, and unspoken authority. Felicia followed orders, terrified and exhilarated, realizing her survival depended on his control and her obedience. After the smoke cleared, the city was silent again, the streets littered with the evidence of power, dominance, and revenge. Felicia felt a strange mix of horror and awe. The man who protected her also held the power to destroy anyone, anywhere, at any time. In the aftermath, as the city breathed a fragile sigh of relief, Felicia stood in the penthouse once more. He approached, hands brushing hers, eyes unflinching. "You understand now," he said softly, "that leaving is not an option. This is your world, as much as mine." Felicia nodded, understanding that the balance of fear, desire, and power was permanent. She was part of the Glass Kingdom now, not fully free, not fully a prisoner, but irrevocably claimed. The shadows had deepened. The blood had been spilled, and there was no undoing the bond forged in chaos, fear, and obsession. The city was restless. Felicia sensed it before anyone spoke. Whispers, shadows shifting, the air thick with impending violence. Every street seemed to tremble under the weight of expectation. He entered silently, his presence a storm in human form. Felicia's pulse quickened instinctively. "Tonight changes everything," he said, eyes cold and unyielding. She nodded, knowing he wasn't speaking metaphorically. Danger had a name, a method, a precision, and it was arriving. The traitor had been patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Felicia and the Mafia boss watched from the penthouse as the enemy moved pieces across the city like chess, calculating, ruthless. "You see," he said, voice low, authoritative. "Even those closest will test you, even those you trust." Felicia felt a chill. She knew now that loyalty in this world was fragile. She also knew that he controlled every variable, every reaction, every outcome. And if she stayed close enough, she might survive, barely. It came suddenly. Shots echoed across the city streets. Tires squealed, metal screamed. Felicia clung to the edge of the car as he maneuvered, every action precise, every decision lethal. Enemies fell in calculated silence, one after the other. Felicia's breath caught in her throat, terror mingling with exhilaration. She was alive because he allowed it, because he dominated the chaos like a conductor orchestrating carnage. Afterward, the streets lay scarred, the air heavy with smoke and blood. She realized with a jolt that safety was not a guarantee. It was an imposition, enforced with violence and control. Back in the penthouse, he surveyed the aftermath. Felicia watched him, the man who commanded the city and dominated her world. Every decision, every word, every silent movement radiated authority. "You belong here," he said quietly, brushing her hair back. "Not because I want it, but because I make it so. Your place is not your own. It's mine to define." She understood. Obedience was survival, and survival was her tether to him. Every instinct told her to resist, but every lesson in terror and desire told her to submit. Alone, Felicia finally spoke. I never wanted this," she admitted, voice trembling. He smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of lips. "And yet, here you are. You could deny it, resist it, hate it, but it is inevitable. I claim you, not out of mercy, not out of affection, but because it is what must happen. The power imbalance, the obsession, the dangerous magnetism, it was complete." Felicia realized she could fight it all she wanted, but she could not escape the gravity of his control. The rival family made one last desperate move. Felicia watched from the shadows as he moved into position, every step deliberate, every gesture precise. The confrontation was brief, violent, and final. Enemies fell with ruthless efficiency. Felicia's heart pounded in her chest, but she understood this was the cost of survival. This was the price of being close to him. When the last threat fell, the streets were silent again, scarred and conquered. She looked at him, and in that moment, understood the depth of his power and the inevitability of her place beside him. Later, in the sanctum of the penthouse, he approached her with measured steps. She could feel the weight of him in every movement, the unspoken dominance that had always been there. "You are mine," he said, softly, yet every syllable carried iron. "Not because I ask, but because I decide. Resistance is irrelevant. Escape is impossible. You are claimed." Felicia nodded, heart heavy with desire, fear, and recognition. Every instinct, every part of her being, screamed against it, and yet she knew he was right. There was no alternative. The bond, forged in chaos, fear, and obsession, was unbreakable. The city had survived the night, scarred and breathing, as had she. Felicia sat silently, tracing her fingers along the glass, reflecting on everything she had endured. He stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, unyielding, omnipresent. "This is your world now," he said. "Not free, not safe, but real. I protect it, I control it, and you are part of it." Felicia exhaled, understanding the finality. There was no undoing this. There was no returning to the life she once knew. The power, obsession, and inevitability had claimed her entirely. In the quiet aftermath, the weight of their connection settled over them like smoke. Felicia had survived the chaos, but only because of him. The line between fear and desire had blurred completely. He did not promise love. He promised control. He did not offer safety. He imposed it. And yet, in the darkness, Felicia understood that her life was intertwined with his. The claim was complete, and the story closed, not with happiness, but with inevitability, with possession, and with the permanent imprint of power.